Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is the Ukraine War news update segment thing for the 16th of February 2023. Let's get straight to it. We'll go to the Ukrainian figures for the Russian losses the day before. All the caveats, inaccurate propaganda. Russia don't produce the same, but I think they are indicative, and I think they are actually more accurate than some people suggest because of a whole bunch of data I've been providing over the last few weeks to show that. And I will hopefully, give a little bit more today. It's all about building up a picture based on all these jigsaw pieces. And I think these figures are certainly somewhat accurate. Um, so 690 liquidated personnel, that is uh, still above average, although we've had this weird sort of week where you've had 1,140 on one day. That's a record number, and that appears a lot less. And you think, oh my goodness, that's what a slow day on the battlefront. But actually, 690 is well above average still. So that is a considerable loss for the Russians. If they lost 690 every day for this war, they'd be in more trouble than they are presently. Tanks, 10 APCs, 3 artillery systems, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. Seeing more of these tick up. Just a consistent number, 2, 1, 3 every day. And actually, these are very important targets, I would say, because the Ukrainians need to get air superiority. It's a contested airspace, and at some point they're going to have to get air superiority. And if they're ever going to be given Western planes, they will need to take out these anti-aircraft installations. So that's hugely important. One helicopter, one drone, and 6 vehicles and fuel tanks. So fairly average across those statistics, I would think. So the claim from the general staff is a Ka-52 was shot down yesterday, and we've seen footage of another Wagner Su-24, another Wagner aircraft that's been taken out. Yesterday, I showed you one that returned to base was hit by manpads. That'll be out of action for some time. I said I don't think this is the one that Wagner admitted they had shot down, so Wagner have actually lost 2 aircraft in the last few days. There is old Prigozhin. That aircraft will be a sore loss for them. And then moving on, here's an OSA 9K-33 air defense system being taken out. And a roof collapsing on it's not enough. It needs to be hit and taken out. So a second hit there. But it looks like there are other vehicles in there. So again, when you're talking about losses, it's footage like this that is important to build up that picture. So yeah, that's air defense system. But this is rather vague, I had to admit. Valentine's Day massacre for more of Russia's soldiers. Ukraine's command claims that border guards killed 60 invaders in the Donetsk area. Mortars, grenade launchers, and small arms fire have been said to stop the attack. But again, that's kind of another claim to add into the 690 that we saw. And then building up the picture further, 20 trucks full of wounded Russian soldiers have been reported arriving at a hospital in Starobilsk. To remind you where Starobilsk is, northeast sector, we've got Kupiansk, Svatova, Kremena. Starobilsk sits behind, not behind it, to the east of Svatova. So this would indicate that there are heavy losses in the Svatova to Kremena area. Of course, that's going to be for both sides. But anyway, the evidence here is 20 trucks full of wounded soldiers arriving in a hospital in Starobilsk. And that's an unusually high casualty rate for the area. Then you can add another piece of jigsaw to this. So in Simferopol in Crimea. So Crimea is down here. Simferopol is one of the main sort of towns or cities in Crimea. There is a blood bank that's been set up, a blood center to start a mass collection of blood from civilians and delivery of blood from other blood transfusion stations. And although this is pretty normal for a wartime, to have started one up in Simferopol that wasn't already there would suggest that there is a greater need now than there was, say, a month ago. This will no doubt be happening for Ukrainians as well. They'll be having huge blood collection programs going on in Ukraine, no doubt at all. Okay, one of the biggest pieces of news overnight was that Russia launched another wave of missile attacks, only 32 compared to over 120 is sort of the most we've seen. There were these boats hanging out in the Black Sea that looked primed and ready to send these missiles, so it's not unexpected. However, there were 32 sent. and 16 of them were shot down. So it's only a 50% takedown rate, and that appears to be because of the KH-22 that were used. So 12 KH-101 and 555, 6 of which were down. They were sent by two 95 MS strategic bombers in the Caspian Sea, 8 Caliber missiles sent from a frigate in the Black Sea. All of them were taken out. 12 KH-22 cruise missiles from 6 Tu-22 and 3 long-range bombers in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Now, doing the maths here, so all these announcements have been made that it says, oh, by the way, sorry, I've interrupted myself. Additionally, 2 Russian Su-35 tactical aircraft launched 2 KH-59 guided air missiles from the area of occupied Melitopol, Zaporizhia. The Ukrainian air defenses destroyed both KH-59s, according to the AF command in the Operational Command South. The Telegram channel of Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's Armed Forces, Zaluzhny, published an update saying that together with 32 cruise missiles, Russians also launched a total of three rather than two KH-59-31 guided anti-aircraft missiles, and also used one Onyx anti-ship missile. So again, when they start using these missiles aren't designed to be used in those modes, why would they do that? Why would they not use the missiles that are better, more accurate, and will do more damage used in the proper mode? The only thing that makes sense of that is they don't have enough of them. It's the only explanation that makes sense of their use of these other missiles in their non-primary usage. But anyway, it seems like something like 50% of them were taken down, there or thereabouts, and this is because the KH-22s are getting through because Ukraine do not have air defense systems that are capable of taking out KH-22s. They just don't have them yet. I think Patriot missile systems should be able to do that, but they don't have them in place yet. I'm not sure about NASAMS. I'm sure someone will let me know. Okay, going on to a report that's come out just recently from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Going back to the missiles, I don't know the damage that's been done to infrastructure and how significant that is, and whether it's energy and whether it's something else. News will come out soon, I'm sure. Anyway, so this report said the Russian army is estimated to have lost nearly 40% of its pre-war fleet of tanks after 9 months of fighting in Ukraine, and that rises to as much as 50% for some of the key tanks used in combat. So this report might be based on stats from a couple of months ago now, if it's only 9 months of fighting. That rises to as much as 50% for some of its key tanks used in combat. So its headline count that Russia's number of tanks in its army has reduced by 38% from 2,927 to 1,800, while there have been particularly heavy losses for its workhorse T-72B3, an upgrade first delivered to its army in 2013. So that's around 50% of its pre-invasion fleet of these core battlefield tanks is absolutely incredible. T-72, even though it's like the 1970s, when you upgrade them, you give them a longer lifespan. If you send older tanks into battle with upgraded optics and fire control systems, if you can see your enemy first and get your shot off first and accurately, then job done. It doesn't matter that you're in an older hulled tank so much. Now, if you came across a main battle tank from a modern era like a Leopard 2, and then chances are they're going to spot you first and they're going to shoot you, and even if you do shoot at them, you're less likely to pierce their armor. So that's where there's an asymmetry. But in this kind of war that's going on in Ukraine, T-72B3s are absolutely fine to be used. So a visual representation of this shows that this is actually a serious problem for the Russians, whereas the Ukrainians have actually got more tanks than they started with. Based on, yes, as you can see here, they have lost a number of T-64s, but they've gained a number of T-72s, and that's going to be partly because they're being given them by Eastern European nations, and they're gaining them from the Russians where they've been captured and fixed up. So, and then other tanks as well being given from Western nations. So they've ended up with more tanks than they started with. Russia has lost an awful lot of tanks, and that puts them in a precarious position. Okay, let's go and move on to other news. Okay, fire in Russia again. Interesting one. This one, it's about perspective. Like UK, we have zero of these types of fires on a daily basis. Fire safety is obviously a lot better. Question is, are these fires, is this an above average amount? I showed you some stats recently showing, and this was from Rebar doing an analysis, admitting that they are above average and they're also of a different nature than the usual fires they might have. They are the bigger and more substantial. The fire started in an industrial plant 250 kilometers east of Moscow and spread to the KMZ Spetsmash and Kovrov mechanical plant. KMZ makes gas centrifuges for Russia's nuclear agency Rosatom. So that's why I thought it was interesting to note that. Just another big fire, but could be problematic. Now, this is in response. I said that yesterday, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace for the UK said that 97% of Russian forces were in Ukraine. Someone called me out and that said, no, he said committed to, but that was from a later interview on Sky News. This is where he said it on the BBC. But I admit that the number is problematic, and actually he may have been briefed afterwards and said actually they might not be in Ukraine but committed to Ukraine. But here he's really explicit, and I just want to play you this because it's quite interesting, but also it's wrong, I think.
Well, I think that since General Gerasimov was appointed as the sort of overall Ukraine commander a couple of months ago, when Putin fired General Surovikin, we've seen a sort of effort to advance on all fronts. We haven't actually seen sort of this sort of massing of a single force to punch through in a big offensive. We've just seen an effort to advance, and that has come at a huge cost to the Russian army. We now estimate 97% of the Russian army, the whole Russian army, is in Ukraine. And to put that in perspective, that means those tens of thousands of miles of border that the Russians have with obviously China, with Norway, with Finland. Imagine all those people are now stuck in Ukraine, suffering very high levels of casualties. We saw only.
So it literally is really explicit there. They're in Ukraine, and imagine that all those soldiers that would normally be working the borders are in Ukraine suffering casualties. So it's really explicit. I think that's wrong. I don't think you can have 97% of the Russian army in Ukraine. There are all these sort of claims of mobilized soldiers across the border and troops amassing in certain places, and I don't think that can make sense of a 97% in Ukraine claim. Here, Senior Lieutenant Andrei Hulikov in Sumy, and this is a Times article. I won't go through the Times article to save time, but it is interesting. I might share it later. There are 10,000 Russian troops amassed on the other side of the border. It's the largest concentration there's ever been here, and they'll be even built a field hospital, and that's a dead giveaway that they are planning action. They are also graveling the roads, or these mud roads, so that you can push heavy equipment or drive heavy equipment along them. So the idea that you got 10,000 there is kind of makes the 97% claim problematic, but also it's a bit weird. Like 10,000 troops is not enough to do anything around Sumy, let alone do a pincer movement around Kharkiv. You just, I don't know what use 10,000 troops would be there. You'd need a massive force to do some kind of maneuver that involved coming through the northern borders to kind of maybe meet up with moves around the Donbass, and it also needs to be a lot closer. So rather than being over in Sumy, you'd need. I can make sense of 10,000 troops being up around here, maybe for a move around the Oskil River, and to help their move from Svatvo or Kupiansk. But otherwise, yeah, I can't make too much sense of that. Operationally speaking. Right, so that's that claim. Now let's move on to a bit of geopolitics. So South Africa, there's been a Russian ship that's doing military drills with Chinese and South African Navy ships. Remember, BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They're together in this kind of counterbalance to the US and its strength, its global superpower identity, and South Africa is kind of this small player in this BRICS agreement or group. Opposition leaders are up in arms about this Russian frigate with a big Z on the side of it. Z, obviously, is the correct way of saying this. Ukraine, the latest podcast from the Telegraph, Francis Durney discusses this, and I'm just going to defer to him.
country. And lastly, just on the theme of countries that are working more closely with Russia, and this one, of course, has raised eyebrows, and we've talked on in the past, South Africa. So the controversial Russian frigate that we were talking about before has sailed now into Cape Town. It arrived yesterday and is refueling after a long voyage from Russia. It's of course there to participate in these joint maritime operations with the South African and Chinese navies. Now, I understand from reading reports about it this morning that the ship is proudly sporting the large Z on the starboard sign. That's, of course, the symbol associated with the invasion of Ukraine. And it's caused real anger from the official opposition in the country. The Democratic Alliance defence spokesman has said that this shows that Russia is not deserving of the South African neutrality that it currently has on the issue of Ukraine. He said that the ANC government is abandoning its officially declared neutral position on the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Russia's clear objective with these exercises is to abuse South Africa for their propaganda against the West. The South Africa seems to be prepared to play the role of a useful idiot. This is senseless and a very irresponsible act by the ANC government to please their Russian masters at any cost. This silly attitude will alienate us further from our major trading partners and investors and might push us over the edge into grey listing and the loss of major trading concessions into the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So
absolutely fascinating quote there from the opposition leader. And yeah, I think South Africa are playing with fire with what they're doing. Staying on the marine kind of theme here, the SSU, so the Secret Services of Ukraine, together with the Spanish law enforcement officers, blocked Russian attempts to seize Ukrainian vessels in the Mediterranean Sea. This is from the SSU report. According to the materials of the security service, a court seized the sea vessels. I need to look into this more, but that's incredible that the Russians tried to seize Ukrainian vessels in the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, that's vastly illegal, right? That's piracy. You would like to know the details of that, but yeah, fascinating. Staying on I probably should have put this one first, actually. China is supporting Iran in its confrontation with the West. The head of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, said that China and Iran are a, quote, counterweight to American power. Exactly what I was just saying. China decided to take action against external forces that interfere in Tehran's internal affairs. This is massively important. We are starting to see an axis develop, or not starting, but this war has helped it solidify, where Iran appears to be very much a part of that. That's hugely worrying, given nuclear capabilities, so on and so forth. You got Russia, China, Iran, and then if they have Brazil and India and South Africa as part of a group as well, that could be influenced hugely by Russian and Chinese ideologies and so on and so forth. This is worrying. America are the bad guys to this group, or at least certainly to China and Iran and Russia. Yeah, we are really seeing this kind of polarization in the world, I think, and it's going to be the main geopolitical consideration for the next decade for sure. Okay. US is concerned about, so staying on geopolitics, concerned about reports of a Russian plot to overthrow power in Moldova. US Assistant Secretary of State of the European and Eurasian Affairs, Karen Donfried, said yesterday the US well knows the playbook by which Russia is governed. Moldova's president outlined on February the 13th that she described as a coup d'etat by Moscow to use external saboteurs to overthrow her country's government, put the nation, quote, at the disposal of Russia, and derail its aspirations to one day join the European Union. Sounds just like Ukraine, doesn't it? Sandy's comments came a week after President Zelensky said Ukraine had intercepted plans by Russian secret services to destroy Moldova. Moldovan intelligence officials later confirmed those claims. So Moldova, that is a neighbor of Ukraine, has this thin strip of land called Transnistria, where it is basically an annexed area controlled by Russians. There's about 1,500 Russian troops there. This was potentially going to be a thorn in the side of Ukraine, but actually they've pretty much not been able to do anything. Moldova appears to be a pawn in this very dangerous game of chess, and there is disquiet being fomented there by Russian actors, and yeah, it's a real shame. We'll have to see what happens there. Support for Ukraine is dying away among the American public, according to AP and Nork poll. Support among Americans for providing Ukraine with weapons and financial assistance has grown smaller over the last 8 months. It's actually gone from support for America to send military aid and financial aid to Ukraine has gone from in May 2022. It was at 48%. Sorry, I've lost the link here. And it has gone from 48% to 29%, I think. No, 48%. So here, according to the poll, 48% claim they favor the US providing weapons to Ukraine with 20. Sorry, it was 60%. My bad. It's gone down from 60% in May 2022 and is now at 48%. So that is a decrease of 12% in so what's that, 9 months. That is a bit of a worry because America are the US are a massive part of what's going on in Ukraine, and there will be a lot of people who are just looking at the numbers. You've got to understand these numbers, the figures of military aid support, 10 billion, 3 billion, 800 million, whatever it is, right? Those figures are misleading. If it's on like drawdown equipment, the stuff that's sitting in a warehouse, never going to be used again by the US Army, right? But they'll put a label on that's worth $600 million, that stuff, and we're going to send that to Ukraine. So that aid is a $600 million package aid. Well, actually, that's literally costing zero. In fact, you won't have to house it. You won't have to store it anymore. So it's saving you money to give it to Ukraine. Okay, the cost of transporting it will need to be factored in, but it's not. You're not paying for that stuff. Now, you might pay for it to be replaced, and if you're doing that, you're actually stimulating economic activity within the US because it will be indigenous US companies that are doing that. Now, you can talk about the military-industrial complex, but forget that argument for now. It's misleading to think that you're like going to a bank, taking out these wads of cash and just sending those wads of cash in boxes to Ukraine. That's not what's happening. So you need to be really careful about how how you think about that aid, and I guess that's a case of communicating that to the American public. And also, it's worth contextualizing it, right? The Afghanistan war from 2001 to 2022 cost $2.313 trillion. Okay, this war at the moment is not costing that. There's a really interesting article in Yahoo News. Well, it's not an interesting article. It's just a normal article talking about Zelensky's reaction to Ramstein, the 9th Ramstein, saying that we're going to get, more defense systems, tanks, artillery, and shells. Powerful decisions have been made. Some people have thought Ramstein is a bit sort of this 9th one, not a lot came out of it. You don't know what's gone on behind closed doors. But there's just a couple of comments at the bottom of this article that I find interesting, right? This guy says, more, it might be a Russian appeaser. More, we have given $194 billion. How much more can we give and do in a war Russia cannot afford to lose? And this reply is perfect. It's like going to the dollar store and buying bags of diamonds. We are achieving strategic security goals that would otherwise be impossible for less than 2% of our yearly security budget. Best deal ever. People don't realize in the American public how big the defense budget is, and the security budget, and the international blah 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 budget. All these budgets, these huge amounts of money, and actually the money that's being spent on historically the US's biggest foe to try and deal with that problem is arguably money really well spent and actually relatively cheap considering what an outright war with Russia would be. Right, this war on behalf of the US that's happening in Ukraine, this is the best opportunity the US will ever have to spend a reasonable amount of money to achieve a massive geopolitical goal. So it depends how you frame this. And there will be a lot of people in government saying that this is too good a deal to miss, if you like. But a lot of the US public will look at those top line figures and go, why isn't that being spent on border security? Why isn't that being spent on education? Why isn't that being spent on X, Y, and Z? Actually, you've got to understand that the US spend on the military more than the next 70 countries combined. Their military budget is phenomenally huge, and although it's not a drop in the ocean, what they're spending on the money, of course, on the Ukraine war, of course, it's not. You need to get it into context. Okay, Ukraine's defense minister Reznikov has said that the President Zelensky, so he was going to step down or be demoted because he oversaw people who are involved in corruption. It's not that he was corrupt himself, but the defense ministry were doing procurement that was spending 3 times more than what they should have done on food and all this kind of stuff. So people were sacked, and then he was going to be next to the chopping block. But I think because of his knowledge and his expertise in the area and the importance of his role, he's been asked to stay in the role. That would assume that he's not involved in the corruption himself, but that's quite a big decision being made there. Okay, on aid, 10th package of sanctions against Russia includes trade restrictions worth 11 billion euros. Ursula von der Leyen has said the European Commission proposes to ban the supply to Russia of electronics necessary for the production of drones and helicopters, and new sanctions against Iran. So that's pretty huge. And then there was this article I was going to share about stuff coming out of Ramstein. We'll probably see over the next few days greater detail on what's come out of that. I mean, it's not like the previous Ramstein where we saw before the Ramstein, actually, everyone throwing stuff at Ukraine. But I'm sure there was a lot of meaningful stuff done, or at least I hope. A German minister, Ukraine to receive fewer Leopard tanks than promised. Western allies will not be able to supply. I was reporting on this kind of stuff yesterday. Ukraine with 2 full battalions of Leopard 2 tanks, as they previously promised. German Defense Minister Pistorius has said on the 15th. Now, it's really interesting. Ukraine, the latest podcast, are reporting on this. Germany's like switched around. They've now been getting pissed off with loads of other nations for not providing enough stuff, and Pistorius is angry because they've now Germany is saying, okay, we're going to give a load of stuff, and they've said we're going to give all these Leopard 2s and we're allowing people to export them, and now all these other countries is going, oh, actually, no, we're not, or some of these other countries. And Germany's left going, hang on, we've just completely done a volte-face here, a 180 shift, and now you guys are not coming through. So apparently there's a bit of, shenanigans going on there. The Dutch are one of these countries have reneged possibly on providing Leopard 2s, but that might be involved with German decision-making on export and blah, blah, blah. But they leased them off Germany, and they want to, I think, get them to the same with Denmark, get them to Ukraine. Nonetheless, they are paying for Leopard 1s to be refurbished and sent to Ukraine, and also 20,000 rounds of 120mm ammunition for Leopard 2s to be delivered from the Netherlands. So that's good. US is not currently planning to send fighter jets to Ukraine, says the US ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, and she's told CNN. So at this time, the US has no plans to send F-16s or any other fighters. I suggest you go and watch a video by Ward Carroll interviewing Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute, where he talks about how difficult sending jets to Ukraine is. Like, you can't just say, oh, let's send a bunch of jets. We've got these jets, let's send 6 of them. It's just because primarily the NATO jets can't really be used in the kind of warfare that is now being operated in Ukraine. It's a contested airspace where the low altitude flying will need to be necessitated, will need to be carried out, and only certain jets are good for that. You've got runways that have foreign objects on them, and they get sucked up into the engine, so only certain planes are good for that. And then you need all the supply, logistics, training, yada yada yada. It takes years, or a very long time, and you need the right weapons, and etc. etc. And you go through the whole suite of reasons why actually the US and other nations are better off spending a lot of money and effort on these other pieces of material rather than planes. Planes will be down the list because actually it's way more difficult than people think. It's not a case of like, why don't we just give them 10 F-16s? But this is why, because they won't be able to take off. They'll get stuff sucked into their engines. They've got the wrong, the way that they're using NATO is not the way they can be used on the front line here, so they'll just get shot down, and so and the list goes on and on. So planes are. I've come around to thinking actually concentrate on other things first. Have maybe have things going on in the background, training and whatnot, with a view to this, but it is more complex than people think. The new package of military aid from Sweden will include 51 IFVs. These are CV-90s. These are really good infantry fighting vehicles. They can take out tanks. They've apparently got 40mm cannons that have got really rapid rate of fire. You start spraying tanks with them, they're going to be in trouble. And Archer self-propelled guns. Now, we've already heard that these are going previously, and I don't know if these are extra ones or they're just restating what they'd already promised to give. That'd be weird. So it'd be great if it's extra Archers and extra IFVs to go. First tranche of the French 14 of the French AMX-10 RCs. These are kind of light tanks on wheels, armored reconnaissance vehicles or light tanks, depending on how you define them, are en route to Ukraine and will arrive by the end of February. So that's very soon. They've got pretty decent cannons on board that can take out most of the tanks that the Russians are using. US has signed contracts with Northrop Grumman Systems and Global Military Products for the production of additional 155mm shells. So even at 6,000 shells a day, the Ukrainians are using more shells than Europe can produce. And so you need America and other nations like Australia, South Korea to be on board with this. But making shells is really, really, really intricate. They have to be so precise. So if they are slightly too small, gas will go down the side of the shells and they will not be accurate and they'll fire badly. And if they're too big, they'll get stuck in they won't fire out the barrel. And it's, like super precise, so that you can't just say to companies, oh yeah, make a bunch of these, job done, here's a plan. These are made under very precise conditions. First ammunition from these contracts will appear in Ukraine in March. That's super useful. Ammunition, it's all about ammunition. Germany provides border guards with more equipment. The Ministry of the Interior of Germany transferred dump trucks, refrigerators, compact loaders, mini excavators, and generators to the border agency. This is all really important, and we often think about the headline news of this and that military vehicle, but all of these other types of equipment are absolutely necessary for Ukraine to function as a society. And so, Germany providing them that's no small thing. That's absolutely fabulous. Anyway, that's the end of the news today. I've banged on for too long. Please like, subscribe, and share. All the ways you can support the channel in the description below. Thank you, and I'll catch up with you for the frontline updates shortly.